All right, so I do teach a wide variety of courses, including the ancient languages as well, although what I use TurningPoint for is the introductory level culture courses, so just to be clear on that. And I have to admit that when I was first introduced to clickers as a grad student at UCLA, I thought they were the dumbest thing ever. So I was very much a skeptic initially. So if you felt that way or feel that way, yeah, I definitely have been there. But when I first started teaching at UWM, not using clickers, I was getting a significant number of complaints on my evaluations that students didn't get credit for attendance. So after I got over my irritation at that statement, I really started thinking about, how I might, give students credit for more than just warming a chair in a room. And so how I might actually use TurningPoint to encourage students to become more inquisitive about the material that I was presenting and talking about, and also more engaged with each other without creating, an overwhelming amount of work for myself. One of the issues that we have, we were talking about this before this got started, is how everybody tends to inhabit their own little silos these days. We're all familiar with this in the classroom. And so although it's true that using TurningPoint generally tells me which students are coming to class, although there's a few ways they can get around that, but generally, taking attendance is not my objective with TurningPoint. My objective is to get them out of their individual silos and, engaging, like I said, with both the material and with me. And it takes a bit of cajoling, but I have found that, by encouraging the students to talk to each other whenever I do have a clicker slide up on the screen, a good majority of them do take advantage of that kind of excuse to start talking to each other. And when I have a TA, so for the really big classes, one of the things that I have done as well is I have the TA sit in a different place in the lecture hall at each class meeting and actively introduce themselves to the students around them and kind of try and, engage them as well. So one of the general results that I've seen then from using clickers in my classes is that I have cliques form in a good sense. So I regularly have students comment to me either in person and on evaluations that they amazingly didn't mind coming to class because they got to hang out with cool people. So,
of course.
Amazing. I know, amazing. So anyways, so after Lane asked me to share what I've been doing with TurningPoint, I decided that maybe the most useful approach would be to just kind of give you a brief survey of, some of the types of clicker slides that I integrate into my class presentations, and also just say a little bit, very briefly, about my thought process behind them. And so please do interrupt me at any point and, bring in your different perspectives as well. So one of the obvious uses of TurningPoint slides is just to build on previous knowledge. And, even simple questions can reinforce connections between different modules in the course, just saying, okay, we've seen this before, right? So, and then I'll start talking about the new example of it, right? So, so this also helps make students aware of what they either have or haven't learned, if they're like, oh, I don't remember that, okay, well, we're reviewing it. And also because they, end up seeing a graph of the results for the whole class, right, it makes students aware of when they're falling behind in mastering the material without singling anybody out. So building on previous learning can be made more sophisticated, though, to help students learn how to do kind of more advanced intellectual exercises. So in my case with textual analysis, for example. So one of the things that I do is, I'll put a passage from the current reading assignment, up on the slide and, go over it with the students, and then I will, oops, pushing wrong button. And then I'll ask them, so what does this passage have in common with things we've talked about before? So what patterns, what features of the culture does that passage illustrate that we have talked about before? And after, they come up with some responses and we talk about them, then I would go back and say, okay, so looking at this in more detail, so bring up one of these earlier examples and what are the specific features here that are the same as those earlier examples. So, just starting them onto, very, very introductory level textual analysis, but getting them to, pay attention to details in that way. And then,
Renee,
yeah,
for that slide before
this one?
No, that next one.
The next one, yeah.
They have to put in numbers though, right? They can't put in words, or
So,
do they use their cell phones?
So if they use the app or if they use the fancy clicker that's got the QWERTY keyboard on it, they can enter words.
Wow.
Yeah, and the one drawback though with this kind of slide, this short answer slide that I've found is that their responses need to be very brief, like 1 to 2 words for them to show up. And I've talked to turning people about this and everything, and there is a way to kind of pull up people's full responses, but it also makes their names visible, which is not something I generally want. So, so generally, if we're doing one of these, I'll just tell the students, remember, you need to be very, very brief here, just 1 or 2 words. So, yeah, so if they have either the fancy clicker that's got the QWERTY keyboard, or they're using the app, which, there's an example, which these days it seems like about 90% of students choose to use the app in my classes. So yeah, it's not.
90% use the.
Choose to use the app as opposed to one of the radio frequency devices. I give them a choice. I mean, you can tell them they have to use one specific kind, but I actually give them the choice. So this is just another example, kind of trying to get the students to pay attention to details. And this question is interesting because typically it gets a lot of students in the room to actually pull their books out, because I pose this question. I give them the lines from the poem that, they need to look up. And so a lot of them will look up, bring out their books. And then students who don't have their books with them end up cozying up next to other students who have brought their books so that they can talk about this. So, yeah, so, amazingly it does get them again to engage with each other and, something they're supposed to have read, and then showing them a variation that we see in a visual representation of this early poetry. Another way that I find TurningPoint slides useful is that for debunking false assumptions and kind of preemptively correcting common mistakes. So posing a question that you can assume that probably 80–90% of the class is going to get wrong. And when that happens, it's depersonalized. So when I make the correction, I'm not singling out a particular student who might feel, yeah, see, you're feeling humiliated with me pointing at you, right? So I'm not doing that. I'm not, pointing out a particular student who's going to make a mistake in front of the whole class and be humiliated. Instead, it's depersonalized. But I can just say, no, that's wrong, and not have to, try to be really, really gentle and everything, which I think probably most of us do generally, which is a good practice, but you don't have to do that when it's depersonalized. And I think it makes more of a impression to some extent in that case as well. And then I also do what I call thinking questions, posing an abstract question that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to talk about a concept that relates to the material before actually talking about, it in the context of the material. So that's another example. And then the final example that I wanted to show you is using the teams function in TurningPoint. So I personally use this for review sessions to turn them into a kind of team trivial pursuit exercise to a large degree. And students get really, really into this. So I give just a minuscule amount of bonus participation credit that has virtually no impact on their grade, but still they get really, really into these competitions. So you have them just, assign themselves to a team around the room. I tell them, you want to be on a team with the people next to you because you want to win to get this bonus participation credit. And the teams, people tend to sit in the same place. Teams get really competitive. We get this rivalry going in the classroom and everything. So this does, tend to be really highly engaging in even a very, very large classroom. Well, relatively large classroom, 120 or so.
How does that work? Like, how do you split them into, they've selected a team, well, how does that?
So I've got huge lecture hall, right? So I say teams roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tell them, the idea is you want to be on the same team as people sitting next to you because you want to try to win. And so they then key into the team, right?
How do you use that a question type you can ask in TurningPoint?
The exact same. So what it does is that TurningPoint tracks the responses to questions. And so for this part, then I do have just right or wrong, answers.
So with this, like your device will have some sort of tracking number on it, so it knows what your device.
The
so it lumps your
system.
device into that.
Yes, the system recognizes the students for who they are because they've registered, and when you do this, you end up with, they're put in groups that TurningPoint then tracks for, subsequent questions until you end the team exercise, and then you can. You can choose any number of graphics, but it shows like a little scoreboard thing at the end, so you can tell them which team won. That just feeds into the rivalry in the classroom and everything that seems to be pretty engaging.
So there's a question type that sorts. What is the question type that lets you sort then for subsequent questions to be in a team?
I keep doing the wrong computer. This is the one that sorts them.
So there's a question type though when you say, multiple choice, short answer.
Any of them.
Oh, okay.
You can use any of them. You can use multiple choice. You can also do short answer here.
But there's an
But
option.
putting that, I think what Lane is asking is asking that question now, you answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Now that lumps your device, your individual into that group, so that everything after that is now aggregated into that.
So if you've got, which I do sometimes have, kind of non-team competition questions and then go into the team competition. So basically from this slide through whatever questions I may, question slides I may have, multiple choice, short answer. I'm assuming it works with other kinds of questions that you can use as well, until you close the competition. It's tracking the students' responses in groups.
With those subsequent questions, do they, every student's supposed to answer? So, and what if they answer inconsistently as a team? Does it?
Then their team doesn't win.
Right,
if some of them get it
If
wrong.
we're on the same team and we have different answers, then there's a conflict there to say, well, how do I?
So it does, and I think, there is a way that you can either have, I think it's the average score or cumulative score
Okay.
for these. So the way it will calculate the team score.
So you could hedge your bets and answer different questions in your team if you didn't know,
Yeah.
and then you get partial credit.
I mean, they get credit for participating, but yeah.
But for the big prize, like, it could be a strategy.
Yeah. Oh, well, they start, the teams start like whispering to each other, and they'll start, like shouting out wrong answers specifically to try and mislead the other teams. It can be really pretty comical sometimes what they
And you hear
do.
like every single option being yelled out.
Yeah, yeah. So like I said, I use this for kind of review sessions, but I could certainly see it being used in other types of courses for doing group work, basically, in different ways. So, yeah. Anyway, so those were my examples. I don't know if there's any other
I'm curious
comments.
about your grading. So like what chunk of the course grade, and then you said you grade for participation, not correct answers. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I make what I call participation. I refuse to call it attendance for the reasons I mentioned. So I call it participation, and it's worth 20% of their grade, mostly because through the CEDL stuff that I've done and involvement in, learning practices, that seems to be kind of the magic number to get students to care about something. So it's 20%, and most of the time, whether they answer correctly or incorrectly doesn't matter. I'm just tracking, giving them credit for the responses. So the other thing it does do, if students have a tendency to come in to class late or leave early, then because for the way I set my grade book up and everything, each class meeting is worth an equivalent amount of participation credit. So, if they're ditching out early all the time, then they get 70% participation credit. So it kind of, again, deals with that issue of people, they can't just show up, answer one question, like they can just sign in on a sign-in sheet and then leave. Then it does take that into account as well. Did that answer
Yes.
everything?
And then what do you do logistically, like students' device malfunctions, or like do you go and fix those individual issues for those students?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to fix it. I tell them just come talk to me at the end of class. I always have a roster with me, and we'll make a note, and then when I upload the scores, I just fix them, and they can be fixed either in Canvas after you've uploaded them, and you can add a note, just as you would if a student's excused for an emergency or illness or something like that. Or you can actually also change them in the results function and TurningPoint before you upload them. So there's which that's what I do when I do the team competition and I'm giving bonus credit, is that I change the scores there before, for the people on the winning team, before I upload them, so.
I had a question.
Yeah.
I was really interested in how you are setting up some of the questions to foster discussion. What strategies do you use to build questions to do that, to foster discussion among students, to get them talking to each other in a large lecture?
Well, I think one of the ways is to pose questions that there isn't a right or wrong answer to, and so this is just one example, and so frequently the class is not going to go all one way or the other. They will be split. Say 60 or 70% of them will say yes, and the rest will say no, or vice versa. And so, that gives an opportunity to say, okay, so some of those of you who, said yes here, what was your, thinking about this? And then the same with no. So, posing questions that don't have specifically a right or wrong answer is, I think, one of the main ways that I do that. Sometimes I ask them I integrate more contemporary things. I didn't actually put one of those examples in here, but drawing on in the mythology class, for example, the Percy Jackson or Hunger Games books, which are heavily influenced by classical stuff, which they suddenly everybody knows the name of the nation that was created in the Hunger Games novels. It's like 95% there, but then I can ask them, okay, so where does that name come from, and then show them the Latin and talk about things like that. So yeah. Asking questions that don't have a right or wrong answer, that are just kind of conceptual thinking type questions, and then sometimes bringing in analogies from contemporary culture those are probably my two main strategies that way.
How many clicker questions do you include in a regular class period? Like, how much is too much? How much is not enough?
So I don't have a specific formula, and so some classes have more, others have less. It also depends on kind of what types of questions. If they're questions that are going to generate a little bit more discussion, there tend to be fewer of them and things like that. But I did have somebody observed me and marked that I was putting up one of these slides about every 8 to 10 minutes within a 75-minute class. So honestly, that was not by design. It just is kind of the way it happened. And when I do the review sessions, there tend to be a lot more because I've got a bunch more review questions built into it. So it does vary, but maybe a question every 8 to 10 minutes-ish.
I see you've got the beginnings of a response down on the lower right. Is that something you can just pop right into your PowerPoint slide or whatever you use, and it's an easy thing to do?
Oh yeah. There's when you have the turning point, what is add-on? I guess is what it's called in PowerPoint. Then there's a menu, and you can choose if you want to add one of these types of multiple choice questions, if you want to do a short answer question, what you want to do with the graph. If you want, I think you can do a pie chart. I've always just stuck with this kind of graph, but and whether you want to show the actual responses as the labels on the graph, or whether you want to use just the numbers, or so there's all kinds of ways that you can modify.
And does that add-on live in your slide deck, or do you have to put that onto the classroom?
No, it's all integrated within the PowerPoint presentation.
You do need to have.
You do need to have the TurningPoint program needs to be on the podium computer or whatever, the presentation computer, whatever you're using. Yeah, but it's in the PowerPoint file.
But there's like a device or no?
No, just the podium computer or your
Okay.
own computer showing the
I can show them
PowerPoint
a little
from.
bit of that too, because I have it. 'Cause
Yeah,
said
and
it.
I actually have to.
You have to go.
Because I have to go teach, so.
Can I ask you one more really quick question? Do you ever do this in smaller classes?
Yeah, so I do it in classes that are about 25. And so in those smaller classes, again, it's really more just to get students talking to each other. And I tend to do, this slide is actually from one of those smaller classes, and I do tend to do more of these, discussion-oriented slides in those smaller groups because it's just easier to do in a smaller class. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Sorry to run.
Well, that's a really good question, and we will I'll move right to that. So I'm going to turn off PowerPoint, And we'll just start that process over so you can see kind of what you have to do to set this up. So I'll turn this off as well. Okay, so if you want to, and if anyone knows better than me, please correct me, because I am technically the Turning Point lead on campus, but I don't ever get to use it because I don't teach courses, so it's like you just kind of, you're doing it by theory and you need that practical knowledge, so Renee probably knows way more. So,
I should say, anybody is welcome to come and sit in on any of my classes anytime.
cool, yeah, thank you.
We have to do the reading for that.
You may
No,
want to.
no, but I'll make you answer out loud though.
I would love that.
Join the team and then just
Oh.
sync them.
Yeah.
So you have to start the Turning Point tool first. So you start the Turning Point app, and that's the icon. So you start up the Turning Point app. Continue, log in. And that has to turn on first, right? Then you want to use Turning Point polling. With the PowerPoint polling, so I start that, and that starts the add-on, and then it turns on PowerPoint.
Okay.
So the thing to remember with this is that it is a little clunky. Yeah, and you're gonna. There's a learning curve to kind of figure out. But it's not that difficult. I figured it out because this is really like the first time I've really kind of had to build stuff for people in Turning Point, and you catch on pretty quickly. So it is a little clunky though. It's like, looks like from the 2000s. So I'm gonna turn this slide off. I don't need that one. So I'm gonna open up one of my recent ones I just did. I'll just do this one because it's easier. Here we go. All right, so here's that PowerPoint. And so now this is an interactive PowerPoint, and this is kind of, it's a little bit small, but you can add new questions, clicking on new. And then these are questions that I've already built, and it better darn well be working, because usually what it does is it shows the little options right here. So let's just see if it works today. I'm going to click on present, and it's going to start updating, start getting
And you
everything.
missed an important step.
What? What's that?
You have to start your online mobile response capturing.
Oh, so let's start that. Thank you. So I'm and perfect. All right. So
I
I'm
tried
gonna.
to join your session earlier.
Oh, because you already logged in. All right. So I'm
I
gonna.
can message my students always complain about.
So we use one of these gizmos then?
Now we can join.
I used them yesterday.
So how do you turn it on?
So I just kind of press any button. And this is stop. No, I don't want that one. This is Microsoft Teams. That's maybe my problem. Okay, I'm trying.
They've come a long way. Look how tiny these little things are.
Oh yeah. All right, so I'm gonna make sure I get mobile response going on. Here's the code. It's on your sheet as well. So the code, I did this yesterday. It's 415823A. So now you can use if you have a mobile device and you have to have it already I've already logged it in. So I'm gonna start that session. So now the mobile thing is going. And I can see that this is
Oh,
working.
you're on there. So
Yeah.
did you have to pay to get the mobile app?
No.
You don't, but in order to track students, and anyone can pipe in anytime they want, but in order to get the students to track and to export, you have to have them pay. Otherwise, you won't be able to export into Canvas.
How much is it?
$20 for a 6-month license.
Yeah,
And
and
I
it's-
think I think they can get 4 years for under $100. There have at times been deals where they can get 4-year license and a clicker for $50.
Right.
But it's, a student, they're like, I don't know if I need it in the future,
Yeah.
because some programs, a lot of people use it,
Yeah.
some programs, nobody uses
Right.
it.
And just use it as, and really the app is really what most of them are gonna be using.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would agree with the 20%-ish number. I think I had about 20 students in a class of 250-ish
Uh-huh.
that were using clickers.
Really, I was not
Yeah.
even thinking it was that high.
I was surprised, but the clickers actually tend to work better. They're
Really?
more reliable. You don't need the internet.
All
You
right,
know,
'cause
they're
it's
just
an
talking
RF.
clicker to.
And that's what I have plugged in here. So there's a little dongle that I have tacked. It's the USB dongle I have plugged in. So, all right. This
Oh,
is
so you have to have the dongle or?
For the
Oh,
clicker, the
yeah.
clickers talk to the dongle.
Yeah.
The app talks to the internet.
Oh.
and they all will sync up on their
Yeah.
cloud.
The old
So if you're
dongle
using their
connection.
hardware, you're gonna need.
And you also have to make certain that you'll see on your LCD screen, there's a little 41 at the top. It has to be on the right channel. That's the other thing. So you have to kind of have some setup beforehand. This isn't something you can really, I mean, I can do it the night before because I'm not really connecting this to Canvas. So I was working on this yesterday and I made sure everything was on the right channel, but you want to make sure that you have your clickers, that you have a channel set that you've told your students. You're gonna have to spend time in class to make sure everything's on the right channel, everything's set up. Though there will be the software on the podium computers and there will be the dongle as well. But let's check out what it looks like. So I have some questions. And so here we go. So we can all start, and I see that my app is working. So I have the app,
Yes.
it's going. And then you can ask, so in Disney's Little Mermaid, Prince Eric only remembers one thing about Ariel after his shipwreck. What is it? And then I'm gonna do both here. And I'll just press the buttons and see how they work. So I have 8 responses. Does anyone need any more time? All right, so then I am going to click on close, right? And now that's closed, and there we go. The voice, absolutely, there you go.
That's right.
Good job, all right.
That's what Ursula wants.
That's Ursula's, there you see? All right, what Disney film set in the Dark Ages features Sir Kay, Sir Ector, and Sir Pellinor? And also I will note as well that my polling opened and closed automatically, so you do have to close it manually to then stop accepting questions, but then as soon as I click to the next slide, it opened back up again.
Okay.
So it is somewhat intuitive. All right, so which one? And then I'll see, yep. Okay.
I'm
You
not
can-
telling you.
No.
You can turn other stuff on and off. Like you can put a timer on it so it'll auto close after 30 seconds.
Can I change
You can
mine?
also toggle on and off whether the question
just
shows up
like
on
that.
the mobile device.
There we go. Oh, there you go, and then it stopped it. All right, but it didn't.
But you advanced. Yeah.
Okay, polling closed. So now, why is
Oh,
this
it's so nice to
not
have
showing
that.
the polling is open? So what happened? Now all the responses. See, now my responses are all gone.
Oh, we gotta do it
That's
again.
turning point, man.
We do it. I have to think of it.
All right, let's try it again.
All right, you're
All right,
ready?
well, here's the new question. We'll just do.
No, go
No,
back.
that's-
Oh, sorry.
No, we gotta know inquiring
This is
minds.
so real. I love it.
Okay.
No, I don't want you to do that. It keeps advancing the slide as soon as I.
It is a ghost. It is possessed by evil internet demons.
I guess. Open polling. I'm just gonna tell you.
No, let us do
No.
this.
I'm trying. I'm pressing the button. Let's see. Let's just hit. Maybe there's another. Okay, here's this other button. And if reopen. Okay, now it's open.
Okay,
Huzzah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
don't watch my answer.
No.
Dante, do I have to?
I'll lie you now.
All right. Okay, so now I'm not going to do the automatic timer because then that just advanced the slide.
You worked so hard.
Okay. All right, so has everyone got it in? I have 9 responses. All right, I'm going to close the polling. And there we go. The sword and the stone. Good job. There you go. No, that was actually good. That's a good. It kind of throws you a little bit because you remember her talking to the huntsman and this evil queen. All right, so there we go. Sleeping Beauty as well. All right. So next question.
The results here.
Who answered the following want ad?
Yeah.
I can't even. If you want this choice position, have a cheery disposition.
Oh, I know.
Rosy
this one too.
cheeks, no warts. Play games, all sorts.
Okay, I think that I know.
Alright.
Although just
Look at my answer.
no. Don't look at my answer.
All right, so I got
Think about this.
9 answers. Okay, so I think
No clues.
that was everyone. And I do notice my computer's acting a little buggy.
It's like having a virus.
Good job, Mary
Yeah,
Poppins.
I was like, that's Mary Poppins.
And there's the app will show you, like, it'll give you a nice big screen of like, oh, there's everyone. This, I mean, like the other ones, like, this is the only one anyone ever knows, but like, these are all actually real people from Disney. This is Angela Lansbury's in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, so I didn't remember any of those. It was just very
Oh my
Anyways,
God,
okay.
Beth Hounds and Broomsticks, I must have watched 100 times as a kid.
And that's on Disney Plus now. I'm so excited. All right.
You can watch it 100 times.
I can too. Before starring as Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies, Buddy Epson, showed right there, he looks like my grandpa, co-starred with Fess Parker, right there, in what Disney TV show?
Oh.
That one's not easy.
I'm hiding my answer too.
Well, it was hard for me to find pictures because Fess Parker is really identified with the character that was talked about here. All right, I got 9 responses. That's everyone. So I'll click, oops.
Davy
So,
Crockett.
It was Davy Crockett. For some reason, when I pressed the stop, it advanced the slide. I don't know why. I did the exact same thing, but here's the chart. Most everyone got A, which was Davy Crockett, right?
Yep.
Okay, so good job. And then C was, oh, there it showed it. So
One's
Zorro, that's good. Mickey Mouse Club, very good. And so Davy Crockett, I never knew that Buddy Epson was a Davy Crockett. I'm gonna have to go check out Disney Plus now. But Buddy Epson he also guest starred on the Mickey Mouse Club, which I thought was really cool because that is not how I normally imagine Jed Clampett. So, yes. All right. I watched a lot of Beverly Hillbillies as a kid. All right. So, The Little Mermaid was the second Disney animated feature to include a mermaid, feature mermaids. What 1953 classic was the first?
Oh, 1953.
1953,
Way too young.
Alice in Wonderland, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which, has anyone watched that in this room? Peter Pan and the Sword and the Stone.
Oh.
I've seen all of them.
Which one? I could never get through it as a kid.
That was
The
when you had to
second
buy the VHS tape.
Yes. All right. I mean, I know these because
You actually put the.
I put this together. All right. Okay, so I got 9 responses, and the survey says it was Peter Pan, and it advanced the slide again. It was Peter Pan. There we go. Alice in
Made
Wonderland.
Wynn jealous.
There you go.
Look at that.
So I'm not certain why it's doing that. How do you usually show the slides?
I have the timer on every slide.
And then does it?
And it pops up a graph as soon as it gets to 0. Well, it thinks about it for a second, and then.
But every time I do that, when I did that, it advanced the slide, and
Maybe
now
it's a Mac PC thing.
it could.
Well, and I've never done it on the fly. I always embed that object. So as I make the question, there's an option to add the objects, like the correct answer indicators or the countdown thing. So I don't do it when I'm in the
You never
question.
doing it on the fly.
No.
That's interesting. Okay, so good things to know. It was Peter Pan, and yeah,
Sure.
they were not wearing a lot of clothes, and also they also tried to murder Wendy, which it's like a lot of things going on in Peter Pan. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so this is dark. All right, so that was I wanted to show you what the Turning Point quiz looked like, and we kind of see. The cool thing about the Turning Point quizzes is you can have those embedded timers, you can have it embedded into the slides, and then you can have different slides that are kind of talking about different things, and you can kind of move through them, just like Renee did. What I thought was really cool, she thought about it as a time, or she didn't, but now she does, having a slide interactivity every 8 to 10 minutes, which is kind of, if you think about it, like when you have a video, an online video, you really need to have those online videos should be in there more than 5 to 7 minutes, and she's kind of breaking those chunks up because I remember those 75-minute lectures, and I remember sleeping through a lot of them. Honestly, the guy, he read lecture notes from 1950s. It was in the Onion paper that he had typed up in 1960. So I really feel like I'm excused on that a little bit, but maybe not. But anyways, I just remember that it was just a long, drawn-out thing, but if you have this spots where you can kind of do something and interact, that's good. All right, so let's check out what it looks like in Canvas, because you can have these interactive quizzes in Canvas. You can use the app as well, so students can use the app and answer those questions there. Kathy, do you have your app ready and rocking?
Do not, because I'm doing YouTube
Okay, I'm trying to
chat.
see if I can, I don't have it set up. But you can do it on either a computer, or if you have the app, do it there. You'll have to go to the Canvas quiz.
I don't think you have that module published yet.
Yes.
Do I not have that? Okay, I'll get it published. All right. I was trying to be too clever and say you don't have to have it published right away, so they can't cheat. Okay, Duo. Give me your stupid thing.
How do you really feel about it, Lane?
I feel happy. It's the Android of password manager, password protectors. All right. There we go. Okay, so now I'm in the course, and I did publish it. There we go. And that's going to publish everything. Which I don't want to be. So get that off. So now it's published. Cancel. Okay. All right, so there we go. So you should be able to get into that, and the password is. So you can set up passwords really easy. The password is just A1. It's also on the handout as well. So if you're online, A1, the 26th February Disney quiz is available. And
So if you wanted to do a quiz after the class closed, but they had to be in class to get the password, is that a way to
So,
encourage
yeah.
attendance?
So the idea with that is if you aren't, especially if you don't live stream your courses, but Anne, you may be able to speak differently. But this is that way the student has to be there. They can't just take the quiz. They actually have to be there. And you can have it open and close at a very small window of time. So this is interesting. So I think you have to have it prepped beforehand and all the things set up. And then has anyone been able to get into it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wasn't using my clicker, I'm just using the dots.
That's fine. No, that's
I'm
totally.
just checking the answers.
Just checking.
Okay.
Just watching.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it first. I'm gonna give Sarah the answers.
Okay, so I have some
We're not real
scores.
things today.
So I got one.
I'm still taking it.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's fine. Yep. I won't talk. It's kind of hard to do sometimes. I really like doing this slide. Well, this is really how this is really good. You see much better.
Oh.
I like this.
Is this
The canvas.
Is
I
this
don't know
Quizzes
anything
Plus?
about Disney.
I
New
probably
quizzes.
only know about half of these.
Diane, our
I only
director,
got 3.
was clearing out her basement, and there's a Disney trivia game, and she gave it to me. So I have Disney trivia cards that that's what I'm using. So, and these are the easier questions.
So are 2 out of 5? Okay.
I only got 3.
Just to
All right,
be like really
So let's see, what do we got here? I don't know if Ed was able to take it. Is Ed mentioning? We got 3 people in. There's Dante's score, because you just said 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5. There we go. See you, Sinjay.
So do you like Disneyland?
I mean, like, growing up, that was like the gold standard of cartoons. Like, if you had the Disney Channel, you were made as a kid. I mean, you were the most popular kid around because you could take your friends and watch
All
Disney.
right, but let me say, King Louis could be the full name for King Louis, and he was in the Jungle Book, King Louis.
But that's that's L-O-E-Y. It's not Louis. It's not the.
It's spelled differently, but it is.
That is, you're very good.
That's a distraction.
Very good. That was a distracting. Wow. And that was even that was on the official. No, that wasn't actually. And I threw in the fat, which is King Louis VI, as a distractor as well, because it sounds more
Oh,
cartoonish.
I almost guessed Walt Disney.
You're giving away all the answers. That was my mind blown answer. Okay. Does anyone need any more time? Or we got it? Okay. So I wanted to do this together because you can kind of see when you're doing this, I did not want this to be a commercial for TurningPoint. But I really was much more like, I can see if you're using this into your slides, having something like this does make some sense if you're going to take time to integrate it because you can see it and kind of popping around. Versus this one, you really have to stop the lecture, and then you have to have everyone take their quiz. Then you have to have everyone. Then if you want to show the results, you have to then go to the slide, which you can do beforehand. But it's not like you can still see it this way. This is kind of I like this because you can go through. It's like okay, which of the following kings appear in a Disney film? Does anyone remember? Oh, I showed you on the results, didn't I?
And
Yes.
Richard.
Yeah, the Lionheart, right? Did you see that? You saw the feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Robin Hood.
Yep. So good. I'm glad those worked. So I put feedback on all of them. In what year did Donald Duck debut? 24. I think Mickey Mouse's Steamboat Willie was 28. So that,
Oh.
so 34, which he looks kind of like Daffy, but white, if you looked at the old Daffys and the old Donald. Also, which college mascot is patterned after? It was actually is Donald Duck.
The Mighty Ducks, isn't it?
Well, that's hockey, but it's a college mascot.
Oh.
The Oregon.
Oregon, yeah, like they actually got permission to use Donald Duck as the Ducks, which I thought was cool, from Walt Disney. Which vegetables perform the dance of the sugar plum berries? The
Mushroom.
mushrooms. Who had that right?
I didn't.
Good job.
You're a star.
That's awesome. Yeah.
We're gonna have you at the
Well,
trivia
carrots
contest.
just, to me, didn't make a lot of sense. So then I eliminated it.
Prince Philip, Sleeping Beauty. I guess
I will.
the prince was only given a name when they started making dolls of him. And then in Fantasia, when Mickey Mouse speaks, so the original voice of Mickey Mouse, because he was the voice and other things as well, was Walt Disney, which like that was. All right, these were actually like all the names of different characters. If you got them wrong, it told you which one. So what are we thinking about this? Like, would this? I mean, is it worth? Do you think? I mean, this is
No,
maybe a small sample size.
Do it in the slides.
doing it this way. Do you think this is worth the $20 then per student? Like that's the question that I always am asking. Like, is it worth the cost doing it this way or making a stop and doing it like this?
I think it depends. Are you gonna do 5 questions at a time, or are you gonna do 1 question every 10 minutes?
Right. What are the so if you're just planning on doing it like this, like just 5 at the end, just to kind of,
Then I'd say Canvas works, but you do have to have something in place for students without a smartphone.
which I have suggested on the back.
Yeah.
So 3x5 index card, you can just have them.
There's 20 of those times 4 lectures a week.
But you'll have a small number actually using that because most will just use the phone, right?
Right, but I have about 20 students out of 250
250.
who would
Because
be rocking that. So
yeah, I was
think-
gonna say it's only like 5 to 10%, but when you take 5 to 10% of 250, that's
Yeah.
20.
Or you put them in groups, right? So they self-assign to groups in Canvas, and then they can do it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Self-assign.
So you
So
would put students without a cell phone with students with cell phones so that
Right.
they have participation, but they don't have the device.
Yes. Although, how would
But
a
then
student
how
without a smartphone make it into a group, unless you did it ahead of time?
Well, and they have to say, I don't have a smartphone.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael Newman, he was here last year, and he said that he really didn't have a problem. He segued it. He started it out as if you forgot your cell phone or your mobile device, then it wasn't like it was just like, oh, I forgot, or I just didn't bring it, or you
Right.
choose
If you
not.
don't have a smartphone with you today.
Yeah, if you don't have one with you today. He said he didn't see that there's a lot of like, quote unquote, shame from anybody. Like, oh yeah, I just didn't have it, or I just don't feel like using a smartphone for this, and then nobody really cared. But I think you're right, Ann, that you have 20 students.
Right.
You have 200, you have a large course, and 5 to 10% is still 20 students. That makes a lot of extra work.
Right.
So what about like, so the advantages of, what are the advantages of this?
I think because students can see the answers. I mean, isn't that, I know they can see it on Canvas, but it's like right there in the slides. You're not going back and forth.
And there's some like,
Right.
like this one, I mean, I could set it so you don't get your answers right away, right?
Right.
Or you don't get the feedback right away. But this is kind of like this anticipation you can kind of sense in the room. You're like, we're really curious. Did I get this one right? Did I get this one right? Oh, I did or I didn't. And you know, you can see right away.
And you quickly know whether or not you need to remediate it, right? So as you're going
Oh,
through,
yeah.
if 90% of the class gets it right, you just say, you got it, that's the right answer, move on. As it starts sliding down to 80 or 70, then I'll go back to that picture or that idea and say, we seem a little bit confused about this, let me show you again.
Yeah.
So you just live in PowerPoint instead of having to go back and forth.
And this at the end will be much more like, you know, this is going to be the last 5-10 minutes of the course. You're doing it, or maybe in the middle, but you're going to be like, this is an interruption from the lecture.
Right.
It's not going to be that time to reflect and then remediate, because maybe you'll even forget because you'll be focusing on, I'm just going to go down the list, and it's not as natural to kind of talk about versus this. So there is some really good.
So, I'm sorry, Lee. So the thing in Canvas is just a quiz in Canvas that shows the
Just a
results.
quiz.
It's not using clickers.
No, it's just a quiz in Canvas. You can totally do it on a mobile
Because I was
device.
like,
You could do like Kahoot or any one of these different apps that do it.
Yeah.
You could use, you don't have to use TurningPoint, Kahoot, and I don't know, we've seen a couple of these where.
Problem is that TurningPoint's the only one that's supported that will integrate into the gradebook.
Okay,
So there are a lot of other tools out there,
And
like Top Hat.
Yeah, the
But they don't-
integration into Canvas is pretty seamless.
Yeah.
The upload is relatively
Yeah.
reliable.
I mean, I found it, like everything I found to be a little clunky, but it's not anything you can't overcome. Like, I'm sure once I start figuring out, I'm doing this on the fly, now I'm understanding why it's going forward, why it's not. I just have to kind of work with it a little bit. But it's just, there's a lot of these little small bugs, but they all work, it all shakes itself out at the end.
Yeah, once you're practiced with it,
Yeah.
it's tolerable.
What did you learn today? Like, what did you feel that you took away from this? You still have a question though, Sarah. You're still like
I
looking.
have so many questions. I think it's fantastic. And I like that you can, if a student gets a wrong answer, that student isn't singled out.
Yeah,
And that everybody responds.
right.
Like, that's really cool. But when she was talking about students don't necessarily talk to each other in class, I could see this being a way of not talking. Like I think you would have to design it in a way that people are talking with each other, because if you ask a question and people respond, and then you ask people what they think of those responses, and there's natural conversation, that's different than when you get one answer and, well, some students said this and some students said that. And so I think it takes a little bit of different leverage.
I think, so these questions are really more of like a check questions, right?
Right.
And she was talking about using those to build on prior knowledge. Other questions to debunk assumptions. These are just really like check questions.
Right.
But then she was building these questions that are really about interpretation or opinion.
Right.
Like, what do you think was the most, which Disney movie had the most social impact in the 1960s? And then, you know, you could talk about which ones was it, which one like were people talking about, or like, I don't know, these are just Disney questions, but like, how is Disney influential in the media, and having them discuss like more of an opinion, something that we built upon versus, you know, where is the first mermaid in a Disney movie? So, yeah.
So the first semester I was using e-class response, where I would give them 60 seconds and the question would just like come out of nowhere, and it was this really awkward minute. And so then what I did was I now had like 3 slides back to back. So the first slide has a red thinking bubble on it, and like the session ID and the receiver number if people didn't get it the first time, and then an open-ended question. So like, put these things in order, but there's no things there, the things we just talked about. The next slide, it's got a 30-second timer that fills in. The next slide has a green talking bubble on it, indicating you're done thinking about it, now you need to talk about it. Same question, same info that they need, and then depending on the section, some of them ignore the red and they just start talking right away. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, talk about it, and they just stare at me. And then the third slide finally actually has the question with a 30-second timer. And that's been a less awkward, like, oh, all of a sudden there's a question, like, hey, we talked about this thing, think about it like this.
Well, it's almost like a think, pair, share, but
yes.
But
But
it's
with a
built
multiple
in.
choice question at the
Right.
end that's really rapidly assessed.
How hard is it with timing? So, like, I am running into problems where students are now asking me more questions here than they had at my previous university, and so my lectures run long because I want to respond to the student questions.
Yeah.
How challenging is that then when you have something like this set up and you might not get to questions?
Oh, yeah, I'm always changing stuff, so I never really know when a lecture is going to start or end, but my content just kind of keeps going as we work through organ
Right.
systems.
And do you share your slides with students?
Not until after class. So I give them an outline that has like key images and like outline text, but it's very, very incomplete, and I expect that they'll come and either take notes in their notebook or write on the outline.
Okay.
If we don't get to it, we don't get to it. I usually end up between 4 and 7 questions for a 75-minute class.
And how long does it take you to put the slides together? like to put all the questions in and to think, because
Yeah,
this is a lot of
it's a lot of
back-end
clicks.
design.
It's a lot of clicks. Going from, so I was using Top Hat before it was forbidden, and then switching over. It probably took me 30 minutes per lecture to reformat. So like taking out Top Hat imagery, adding the turning point question. Yeah. Because it's probably 6 or 7 clicks, right? So you like tell it to make a question, you type the question, you have to tell it a right answer, you have to tell it how many points to give for a right or a wrong answer, you can default that.
Right.
You have to add a countdown if you want it, you have to add a correct answer indicator if you want it.
Plus you also have to think of the question.
Right. Yeah, so it's a while the first time. But then once you start doing it, right, then you just kind of copy and paste as you.
So do
think-
you feel confined by it? Like, so if students ask you questions and you get on a tangent, do you feel like you have to, but no, you have to get back to, or can you?
My students don't ask that many questions that have lengthy answers.
Okay.
Maybe my content's just easier to stay focused on.
Right.
Up next, we have this cell.
That
or
would be-
maybe you're just
That would be a
yourself.
challenge in some courses, yeah. But that's something you'd have to probably anticipate and build into.
Right.
But I think that the pedagogical advantage of having those questions built in
Yeah.
to this, just because you're keeping the people engaged, it's not just this long drawn out lecture, there's some interaction.
Well, and everybody has to answer. I mean, that's what I like about
Yeah.
it, is because when I'll ask a question,
It's
you
the
know,
same.
there's often the same people, and then I'll call in different people that haven't answered or say, what do you think? But
You know,
it's-
as a student, the odds of you being called upon